Well, what we know about it is, of course, it's a test flight, and my understanding was they were testing a new type of fuel, for propulsion, and that while in flight, they experienced an in-flight anomaly that caused this mishap to escalate into a catastrophic failure. And of course, the ship broke up, and my understanding is that we have one of the two pilots dead and one in serious condition. This happened about 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific time over the Mojave Desert in California.
Indeed, and of course it's still very early to know exactly what happened, and as you say, the details are still pretty thin on the ground. But we do understand this test flight spent some hours on the runway before actually taking off due to concerns about the weather. Could that have played a part from your experience?
Yes, I think everything could play a part in whenever you have a mishap. What usually ends up happening is it's a series of events that then escalate into a catastrophic failure. So the weather probably did play some role. It more than likely was not the root cause of the failure, but it certainly could have contributed to the catastrophic effects that we saw. And you asked me earlier, am I surprised that this has happened? Space flight is a tricky business. It's not something that's routine. It's not to be taken lightly. And I think these companies that are entering, these private companies that are entering the space flight business are finding out that it is a risky business, and that we need to spend every bit of moment precaution to make sure that it's safe for humans to travel into space.
Indeed, and Jose, we know that this is the second incident to hit the commercial space industry in less than a week, and there's been huge interest, of course, from prospective passengers into suborbital rides into space. Has this been a major setback for that industry?
Well, I think it's certainly going to make people think twice before getting onto a ship and try a zero-G flight into space. But I think that, this is a natural progression of what happens when you're going from having zero experience to trying to send humans into space. It's a steep learning curve. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's an expensive learning curve. I know NASA has lost 3 missions with folks on board, and the private sector is no different from NASA in the sense that we're only human and we could only do so much. And we're going to learn from these failures. But ultimately, I think we're going to be moving forward.
It's been a very costly failure, as you say. I mean, we've now seen one fatality. Now, as I was saying a bit earlier, it's been 9 months since the last test flight. And one of the things that Virgin Galactic switched was the fuel mixture in this spaceship too. What does that tell you about what might have caused this, and also, indeed, about the concerns around the spaceship?
Yeah, exactly. I think, you start changing things around, and that's why you call it a test flight, is you have to go and test it. You could do a hot fire test on your motors, but ultimately, once you get comfortable, you're going to have to do a real flight, and folks have to be piloting that spaceship. And unfortunately, in this particular case, the actual test flight, we don't know what the cause is, so we can't blame it on the new fuel. It could be something completely independent of that. But certainly the fact that we're using new fuel would be a suspect that's what we first have to start looking at in the failure analysis process and finding out what the root cause of it is and trying to learn from it.
We also understand that both these pilots were equipped with parachutes and that they actually did employ them during the course of this crash, but it does sound like there's been at least one fatality. What does that tell you about the precautions that Virgin Galactic was actually employing?
Well, I think they're trying to employ as many precautions as possible. There's an ejection system for the pilots, but when you're going real fast and you eject at high speeds, then you do risk the chance of either hitting the plane or if the plane's breaking up, the debris hitting the individual, or even simply a limb on your body being dislocated because of the force of the winds as you eject with such high speed. I think there's ideal speeds at which you can inject and not get hurt. But when you're in a catastrophic failure, sometimes you don't have the luxury of picking at what speed you eject from the aircraft.
Indeed, and sadly that appears to have been the case this time. Jose, we really appreciate you joining us tonight on Sky News to share your insights with us.
Thank you very much.